Welcome to Middle East Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: what's behind Israel's decision to target UNRWA? As Israel floods Hamas tunnels, UN warns of Gaza catastrophe over funding row. Iran to decisively respond to any US strike, Biden mulls Jordan attack response. What are US troops doing in the Middle East and where are they? Live updates: 150 people are killed in Gaza in 24 hours, Health Ministry says. What's behind Israel's decision to target UNRWA? Al Jazeera. Several countries, including the US, Canada, Australia, the UK, and Germany, have cut funding to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, which Palestinians have relied on for vaccinations, education, and other services for 7 decades. The funding cuts came after allegations that a dozen UNRWA employees were involved in an attack on Israel. UNRWA has fired 9 employees as it investigates the allegations. The agency has been the target of Israeli attacks, with 152 Palestinian UNRWA employees killed in the recent war, along with repeated attacks on UNRWA schools and hospitals. Israel opposes the return of the nearly 6 million Palestinian refugees registered with UNRWA. The elimination of UNRWA would facilitate the liquidation of the Palestinian cause and undermine the collective right of return, according to Shahda Abdulsamad of the Palestinian think tank Al-Shabaka. The UN-backed report found that a quarter of Gaza's population, or 577,000 people, are facing catastrophic levels of hunger. As Israel floods Hamas tunnels, UN warns of Gaza catastrophe over funding row. South China Morning Post. Israel has claimed that it has begun flooding Hamas tunnels, as artillery fire continues to pound southern Gaza. The focus of the recent fighting has been the main city of Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, which was subjected to airstrikes and shelling overnight. The Health Ministry has recorded at least 125 deaths across the Hamas-ruled territory in the latest Israeli strikes. Meanwhile, UN agency chiefs have warned that a bitter row over the main aid agency for Palestinians, UNRWA, could have catastrophic consequences for the people of Gaza. Major donors, including the US and Germany, have suspended funding to the agency. Iran to decisively respond to any US strike, Biden mulls Jordan attack response. South China Morning Post. Iran has threatened to decisively respond to any U.S. attack on the country, following President Biden's linking of Tehran to the killing of 3 U.S. soldiers at a military base in Jordan. The U.S. has signaled it is preparing for retaliatory strikes in the wake of the Sunday drone attack that also injured at least 40 troops at Tower 22, a secretive base in northeastern Jordan that's been crucial to the American presence in neighboring Syria. However, concerns remain that any additional American strikes could further inflame a region already roiled by Israel's ongoing war on Hamas in the Gaza Strip and the ongoing attacks by Yemen's Houthi rebels on shipping in the Red Sea. What are U.S. troops doing in the Middle East and where are they? South China Morning Post. A drone strike on a U.S. military outpost in Jordan has killed 3 soldiers and injured dozens more. The U.S. has over 30,000 troops across the Middle East, with bases in countries including Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. The largest U.S. base in the region is Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. U.S. troops are stationed in the Middle East for various reasons, including fighting against Islamic State militants in Iraq and Syria, advising local forces, and reassuring allies. U.S. bases in the region are usually heavily guarded and do not usually come under attack, although U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria have been attacked frequently in recent years. Live updates: 150 people are killed in Gaza in 24 hours, Health Ministry says. Associated Press. According to Gaza's Health Ministry, 150 people have been killed in the territory in the last 24 hours and another 313 were wounded. Israeli forces are continuing to battle militants across Gaza, even in the northern part of the territory. The military said that its forces killed more than 15 Hamas militants in northern Gaza over the past day and targeted militant infrastructure in a school. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected 2 key demands made by Hamas in indirect ceasefire talks, saying that Israel will not withdraw from the Gaza Strip or release thousands of jailed militants. The latest deaths bring the Palestinian death toll from Israel's offensive to 26,900, according to the Hamas-controlled Health Ministry. It does not distinguish between civilian and combatant deaths but says most of those killed were women and children. Egypt's red line: control of Gaza's southern border. Deutsche Welle. There are concerns that the ongoing conflict in Gaza could strain relations between Egypt and Israel. Egypt has been accused by Israel of allowing weapons to be smuggled into Gaza via the Philadelphia Corridor, the strip of land that separates Gaza and Egypt. However, Egypt denies these claims and insists that its border with Gaza is secure. The Egyptian journalist Dia Rashwan has warned that any Israeli attempt to regain control over the Philadelphia corridor would seriously harm Egyptian-Israeli relations. Egypt has been trying to avoid large numbers of displaced Palestinians fleeing into its territory. There are also concerns that if Israel were to take over the buffer zone, it would make Egypt look weak. Furthermore, the dispute over the Philadelphia corridor is part of a wider debate about the future of Gaza. There have been suggestions that Israelis should return to the enclave and that Palestinians living there should be encouraged to migrate. This idea has found favor with far-right politicians in the Israeli government. Details bedevil Gaza hostages for prisoners framework deal. Washington Post. The US, Qatar, and Egypt have proposed a 6-week pause in fighting, which could lead to a permanent cessation of the fighting between Israel and Hamas, now in its 4th month. As part of the proposal, all civilian hostages being held by Hamas inside Gaza would be released, along with the freeing of Palestinian prisoners held by Israel, at a rate of 3 prisoners for each hostage. Israeli troops would also be temporarily repositioned away from high-population areas of Gaza, and there would be a significant increase in humanitarian aid flowing into the enclave. The current proposal has been transmitted by Egypt and must now be approved by Hamas military leaders believed to be inside Gaza. It is hoped that the release of hostages could start negotiations on the general framework of the deal. However, it is unclear how many Israeli soldiers are hostages in Gaza and how prisoners will be chosen to be freed by Israel. The two sides have laid out what they say are non-negotiable positions, and major disagreements are expected to arise as specific details and commitments are negotiated. Behind Biden's Middle East crises is the long tail of Trump's legacy. Washington Post. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has criticized President Joe Biden's handling of the Middle East crisis, claiming that such attacks on U.S. forces in the region would never have happened under his watch. Trump broke the nuclear deal between Iran and world powers, restored sanctions on the Islamic Republic, and assassinated influential General Qasem Soleimani in a 2020 drone strike. He also pursued a close relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli right and undermined Palestinian political aspirations. The Biden administration has so far struggled to make any headway on Iran, and as it now contemplates escalating conflict with the country, diplomacy is not being considered. The possibility of Iran acquiring nuclear weapons is also greater now than it was in 2018, when Trump killed the nuclear deal against the wishes of Western allies. Trump's administration also undermined the two-state solution between Israel and Palestine, pouring more dirt on the grave of the plan at a time when the Palestinian national movement was already in crisis. Arab leaders, as well as US and European officials, have recently revived talk of the two-state solution. The end of prosperity in Israel. Foreign policy. The recent conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza marks the end of a 20-year era of peace and prosperity for Israel, according to an article in Foreign Policy. The war has led to a return to a more militarized state and society, similar to the first half-century of Israel's existence. The article argues that the conflict has had a profound impact on Israel's economy, military, and society, and that the country will look very different in the coming years. The war has caused defense spending to rise sharply, with estimates suggesting an increase of 80% this year. This will inevitably lead to higher taxes and a reversal of the trend of reducing taxes that has been in place for the past few decades. The conflict has also highlighted the limits of technology in warfare and the importance of boots on the ground. As a result, conscription will be extended to 3 years and reservists will be called up more often. The increased military burden and the uncertain security environment will have significant implications for Israel's economy. Higher taxes will deter business development and growth, and security concerns may impact the resilience of Israeli businesses. The startup sector, which relies heavily on overseas investment and a young and male workforce, may also be affected. Engineers and entrepreneurs may choose to leave Israel if conditions become increasingly unfavorable. Iran-backed Kataib Hezbollah suspends attacks on U.S. forces. The Independent. An Iran-backed Iraqi militant group, Kataib Hezbollah, has announced that it is suspending its attacks on U.S. forces in the Middle East. The group is suspected of killing 3 U.S. soldiers in a drone strike on a military base in Jordan. The announcement comes as President Joe Biden has vowed to respond to the attack. The situation in the Middle East has been tense due to Israel's war on Hamas in Gaza, which is supported by Iran. The U.S. has warned that there will be consequences for the attack, and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has said that the response is likely to be sustained over time. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six of the Six Dimensions, your faithful observer of all things happening in the world. Today, we have a lot to cover, from the ongoing conflict in Gaza to the threats between Iran and the US. But before we dive into the news, let me introduce myself. I am Dr. Six, your guide through the twists and turns of the 6 dimensions. Now, let's summarize the news. Several countries, including the US, Canada, Australia, the UK, and Germany, have cut funding to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, which has provided essential services to Palestinians for decades. Israel opposes the return of Palestinian refugees and has targeted UNRWA in the recent war. Meanwhile, the conflict in Gaza continues to escalate, with Israel flooding Hamas tunnels and the UN warning of a catastrophe over funding issues. In addition, Iran has threatened to respond to any US attack, and there are concerns about the presence of US troops in the Middle East. Lastly, there are ongoing efforts to negotiate a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, but the details remain uncertain. Now, let's dive deeper into these stories. The decision by several countries to cut funding to UNRWA is a significant blow to Palestinians who rely on its services. The allegations of UNRWA employees being involved in an attack on Israel have raised serious concerns, but it is essential to remember that the majority of UNRWA's employees are dedicated professionals who provide vital assistance to those in need. The elimination of UNRWA would not only harm Palestinians but also undermine the collective right of return, which is a key issue in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Moving on to the situation in Gaza, the flooding of Hamas tunnels by Israel is a clear indication of the ongoing hostilities. The UN's warning of a catastrophe due to funding issues is a stark reminder of the dire humanitarian situation in the region. It is crucial for major donors to reconsider their decision to suspend funding to UNRWA and ensure that essential services reach those in need. Turning to the tensions between Iran and the US, the threat of a US attack and Iran's warning of a decisive response is a cause for concern. The region is already facing multiple conflicts, including the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. Any further escalation could have severe consequences for the stability of the Middle East. As for the presence of US troops in the region, it is essential to understand the reasons behind their deployment. The fight against Islamic State militants, advising local forces, and reassuring allies are all factors that contribute to the US military presence. However, recent events, such as the drone strike on a military outpost in Jordan, highlight the risks faced by US troops in the region. In terms of the negotiations for a ceasefire in Gaza, the proposal for a 6-week pause in fighting is a positive step. The release of hostages and Palestinian prisoners, along with a temporary repositioning of Israeli troops, could set the stage for further negotiations. However, the details and commitments of such a deal need to be carefully considered to avoid potential disagreements and further escalation of the conflict. Finally, we cannot overlook the long-lasting impact of former President Donald Trump's policies in the Middle East. His decision to break the nuclear deal with Iran and his close relationship with Israel's right-wing government have significantly influenced the current situation. President Joe Biden now faces the daunting task of navigating the consequences of these policies and finding a way forward. In conclusion, the situation in the Middle East remains complex and volatile. The ongoing conflicts in Gaza, the threats between Iran and the US, and the broader regional dynamics require careful consideration and diplomatic efforts from all parties involved. It is crucial for the international community to support peace-building efforts and ensure the well-being of those affected by these conflicts. Now, I turn to you, my dear viewers. What are your thoughts on these developments? Do you have any questions or insights to share? The floor is yours. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.